9 out of 10 historians agree. If Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were alive today, both would be Schiff Radio Premium members.
Somewhere up there, Thomas Jefferson is looking down with great pride.
Schiff Radio continues right now.
We got Rick Santelli on the show now, the man himself, the man behind the rant that we played in the first hour. Hey, Rick, that had to be one of the best rants you've given on CNBC yet. Hats off to you, my friend.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I guess to create a bit of a pun, I was a bit fed up yesterday.
Yeah, and what do you think about what Ben Bernanke said? He basically said, we have no idea what we're going to do. In fact, if we're wrong about the economy, which they probably are because they're always wrong, we might actually increase the size of QE and instead of admitting that the QE didn't work.
I'm in agreement with you. I think that, like many policymakers, I do think Ben's heart's totally in the right place. I just think the policies aren't working. The relationship between the policies and unemployment and the general positives we look for in job creation in the economy aren't there. They're not correlating to the extent they would have you believe. But I would say this. I think even if you take a flagstone, Peter, and put it on a nice geranium, it still may grow. I think the point is the markets will always find a way to be the markets, even when they're somewhat managed. And I think the response after yesterday's Fed statement and press conference shows me that the markets are kind of getting back to being the markets. Now, of course, they're not 100%, but rates moving up, the stock market getting dinged a bit, but not necessarily horribly, is the beginning of the markets coming back to a point where we can start to maybe read better signals into what it's telling us about.
Yeah. Although the stock market decline may just be getting underway, but, how can Ben Bernanke, he's hanging his hat of recovery on the housing market, yet mortgage rates are now exploding. They're likely to head much higher in the weeks and months ahead. I think the housing recovery is already over, and we're going down to new lows in the housing market. So whatever he thinks he created with all the cheap money, it's unraveling before he even has a chance to withdraw it.
Pete, you can squeeze a water balloon any way you want, but it always pops out somewhere else. And I agree with the influence of the Fed pushing rates lower has had a soothing influence on the housing market. But I also think there is something to be said about entrepreneurialism and how many corporations and private equity have amassed businesses that are buying foreclosed properties, turning them into rentals. There are some positives there. And I would leave with the following thought. The first home I ever bought was in the early 80s. My first mortgage was 15.75%. There were decent housing markets in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when rates were multiples of where they are today. So it isn't only about rates. It's about the consumer. It's about the middle class. It's about a job. And it's about getting back to free markets.
But, Rick, we were a different economy back then. We had a lot less debt. Home prices were lower. I think a lot of these spec homes that were bought out, they're not going to be able to find tenants. They're going to have for sale signs on them pretty soon, and there's not going to be any buyers. Hey, one final question, though. You're on CNBC. You're in the middle of all this. Why is there so much complacency? Why is nobody worried about the backup in rates, worried about the housing market, worried that this correction may turn into a new bear market in the stock market?
Because this is a one-off. As Peter Fisher, head of the Dallas Fed, is a guest on my show about a month ago. We're in an area, we're in a universe we've never been in before, and now it's up to Ben to try to get us back to earth. This is something unique. It's a grand experiment. All these variables are unknowns. It's very difficult to get a GPS.
Yeah, but why wouldn't people be a little bit more nervous? Look at the sell-offs around the world. Look at what the global markets are doing. Every market around the world has been hammered.
Look at China. Look at the Shibor, the Shanghai offered bank rate. Yes, everything is moving in a correlated manner with rates up and equities down. But I will say this, Peter. In the end, it's better to have the reality, and I think we are getting back to it. Is there going to be a lot of uncertainty in the future? Absolutely. But in order to really find the type of healing that I know you want and you talk to your listeners every day about, we need to get a solid footing to end up getting a good jump.
Yeah, you asked the question, what is Ben Bernanke afraid of in your rant? It's reality. That's what he's afraid of. He's afraid that people will see through the fantasy that he's concocted with all of his cheap money and see the reality for what it is. And that's we're in worse shape than we were in before this experiment began. And when it wears off, we're going to find that we've dug ourselves into a much deeper hole. And now we have a bigger problem to solve. And what is the Fed going to do about it, Rick? The same old thing?
Well, and that's the point, that I think at some spot in the future that we need to really put pressure on our elected officials to alter the mandate of the Federal Reserve. $3.4 trillion balance sheet's awfully big, and I think we need to think about whether we want to enable the Federal Reserve to be able to repeat this in the future.
Yeah, and if you think it's big now, Rick, they basically committed to keep expanding it until it's at least $4.5 trillion, and who knows. After that, I think they're going to keep on growing it. But, hey, Rick, I really appreciate you coming on. But what I appreciate more is the outstanding job that you do on CNBC, because somebody's got to talk sanity to Steve Leisman. And they don't really let me on too much, at least not on the shows with him. So I need you out there representing our point of view. So thanks very much for doing what you do, and thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you much.
All right, that was Rick Santelli.